Hello and welcome back to The Benchmark. We've been speaking with Professor and Congressional Fellow Dr.Menna Demessie. I want to go back and talk about your classroom, mainly because I wish I was in it. But you recently had Prince Ermias speak to your class. Why did you bring someone like Prince Ermias into your class, considering how, we are a democracy, and I mean, what is the relevance in having someone like Prince Ermias speak to your class?
It was such a joy because there's a lot of great work that's been done in terms of like teaching African, policy courses at the college level. But oftentimes you actually have to major in African American studies to take a course like that. When you take a policy course in general, we have a lot in terms of the history books reflecting more than just the fact that Africa is a continent that was colonized, or, the Black people in the U.S. only have this history of slavery. There's a lot more to the history of Africa that we don't get to hear about. And a lot of it is important to know because it explains why, U.S.-Africa relations, for example, is the way it is. And so one thing that we had was Prince Ermias come to the class, which was great, and had him talk about the significance of Ethiopia in the Black liberation movement and how that played a role in galvanizing oppressed peoples across the globe, and how influential that was in helping shape the civil rights movement, as well as encouraging, other African regimes to be strong and being, independent nation for the, first time. And so it was great to hear someone who sort of can directly speak to that and whose background, stretches back to King Haile Selassie. So the students were very happy, and we had discussions from, everything from King Haile Selassie's speech to the League of Nations in 1936, I believe it was, to questions of why, should the U.S. be in Libya, and what does it mean that what does democracy mean on the African continent, and what do elections mean, and should that sort of be the only thing we should be, talking about when it comes to democratic and political stability in the region. So he was able to share his thoughts, and I think it was a transformational moment, not just for the students who often have to read a book that maybe only has one page that says, oh, Ethiopia was never colonized, and but it was also a great moment for myself to just be able to be in a position where I could teach a class that sort of gets more into the complexities of Ethiopian history, but also Pan-African history, and policy, and bring that all together. So it was great having him talk to the students.
It's really serendipitous that you had him speak to your class and that I can talk to you about it, because a classmate of mine had recently asked me what my general reflections were on Emperor Haile Selassie, and she had concluded that either Ethiopians really hated the monarchy, or that we're always looking back in a sort of nostalgic sense. How do you think Ethiopians should be reformulating or be reflexive about our political history, instead of always kind of living in a, we've never been colonized type of mentality? Well,
I mean, that's the question that I think, that's the question of the day. I mean, everyone has, my connection to the continent is through my parents. So, it could have been very different had I, not been raised to know what Ethiopia means, where my parents come from. And so I think with any community that reflects on the generations that have passed, there's always this sense of nostalgia. But it is important to actually know and read history, because history varies for different people, and you can certainly focus on more of the good than the bad, which tends to be the case. That being said, I think Ethiopia's history is clearly significant, and has sort of, it is important that it's sort of never been colonized. Things have changed since then, but in terms of understanding and reflecting on history, that hasn't changed, and the impact that Ethiopia has had on other African nations during independence, on certainly even giving African Americans a connection to their African past, I think that's indisputable. And so when one talks about these issues in a foreign policy class, they're very relevant. But if you're talking about other domestic politics and the different communities within Ethiopia and their sort of varied interpretations of history, they're all legitimate. That's sort of but it also depends on whose background we're talking about. So.
Right. Could you speak a little bit more about the influence of Ethiopian history on other African nations and even on America? Because like I was saying, a lot of Ethiopians kind of recognize our significance as being insular, in the sense that we're an isolated people who've been able to push away any kind of influence, but really our influence has been quite expansive.
Mm-hmm. Well, even if you go back to the 1960s, when most of the, you've got Ghana becoming independent for the first time in 1957 with Nkrumah, and you have Jomo Kenyatta, you have on the African American side, Charles Diggs, first African American subcommittee chairman on the Africa subcommittee in the House, who made Africa an issue for him, to sort of talk about apartheid in South Africa, and to look at the ways in which these African countries were becoming independent and asserting their own legitimacy and authority. And Ethiopia becomes critical in that story because they were able to maintain sort of their own authority, repeatedly since 1896 and on, and that served as a symbol of liberation throughout the continent and in the Caribbean and in Africa. Everybody was influenced by Ethiopia. You see these green, yellow, red colors that were, but a lot of people don't, or even, everyone talks about Rasta music or Rasta, but no one even knows the term Rastafari comes from the, king's name. So even if you disagree on whether King Haile Selassie was a good king or a bad king, the fact of the matter is that symbolically he represented, and Ethiopia in total, from King Menelik and on, and represented a symbol of freedom that Black people across the globe could identify with, and they used that to assert themselves in sort of their own plight for justice and equality. So so there's sort of there's the international sort of a global impact that Ethiopia has had, and then there's the sort of its own history within its borders.
Right. I looked over your syllabus. Like I said, I wish I was taking your class. You have readings from Demessie, who wrote Dead Aid, which is about how detrimental Western aid has been to Africa as a continent. What do you think was most jarring? Because she stirred up a lot of controversy in the development and practitioners world. Do you think it was what she had to say, or that she was a Black woman, or African woman, that really bothered people?
And so this is another great question, because a lot of my research looks at what we call descriptive and substantive representation in politics. Descriptive being what one looks like, what they stand for, and the substantive, the actual policy. And a lot of this, in terms of racial descriptive, descriptive racial representation, plays a large role in substantive representation, and that's why you want, why women supported Hillary Clinton, or why African Americans would support, President Obama in many ways. And this carries on beyond race to class and all sorts of things. You want someone who looks like you, who reflects your background. And so here comes Demessie with who's a Zambian economist, and so people listen to her because she has an introspective look at Africa. She's African, and that matters.
And she has the credentials as well.
Yes,
exactly.
And I think there has been controversy on both sides as to whether or not they agree with her argument or if it's too sort of extreme. But I think nonetheless she raises a very, very interesting question, which is, do we want aid dependent countries, or do we want to kind of transfer our lens to economic stability? And so I think it's raised a number of questions on how exactly you do that, because clearly we all know foreign aid is critical on the continent in terms of eradicating poverty and disease.
Right.
But on the other hand, some may argue that it's become a business, that sort of aid has been used as a way to sort of help folks as they go along, but not necessarily change their status and get them out of poverty, or and so and that brings
state.
Right, and that brings me back to this other book called Lords of Poverty, which talks about this as well. And so I wouldn't say I sort of disagree or agree, because there's with her argument. I do think that we ought to look at our foreign policy in ways that on the African continent in ways that we haven't before, because we do give a lot of aid, but we have yet to sort of see our economic foreign policy take shape on the continent. I mean, there's a huge debate going on right now as to whether China should be in Africa. And they're doing a lot in terms of economic stability, and you can see it. I mean, I was just there last August, and there are roads like never before. There are stores like never before. There are Chinese people walking around. And I went to China in high school and also in college, and so I speak a little Chinese, and I remember I went to, I think it was Gondar, and then there was this Chinese guy on the flight, and so, I was like, oh, ni hao ma, I'm like, I lived in China, before, and he's like, oh, and name, like, Ezino Minoro, and I'm like, what? I'm talking to him in Chinese, and he's talking to me in Amharic. I'm like, wow, the Chinese are really in Ethiopia. So they're there, and I mean, there really needs to be a conversation, because clearly they have taken advantage of the opportunity, and it's been beneficial to the infrastructure there. On the U.S. side, though, there still has a lot to be done. There's AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, but in terms of seeing U.S. Interest, economic interest, that has yet to be seen. It's right at this point, it's more strategic and more aid-based and also counterterrorism based.
Oh yeah, which I mean getting to the root of why Americans are a bit leery of the Chinese really working in Africa. I mean, would you say that it's because of a hindrance of the geopolitics that America can play? Because if a lot of nations, if they have Chinese money, I mean, there is no incentive to kind of align themselves with the American side, their interests, their politics.
Yeah.
I mean, would you say that is really at the core of the issue?
Yeah, I think there's been, there's this report the Council of Foreign Relations came out with in 2005, which is called More Than Humanitarian Aid, a Strategic Approach to the Continent. And it's this U.S. policy recommendation report that the Council of Foreign Relations came on that looked at a host of issues that I also researched. And basically there's been, I think there's sort of been this acknowledgement that the U.S. needs to do more on the continent beyond foreign aid. But how that takes shape, we're kind of right in the midst of that. I think coming out of the Cold War era, where we only saw our interest in terms of combating the spread of communism, it's going to, we still need time to develop and actually see our opportunity and our benefit in going into the continent. And this is where the diaspora becomes incredibly important, because we're in a particularly auspicious position where we can definitely give voice to interest and promoting sort of bilateral relations between U.S. and Africa, and we have the wherewithal to do that, and so hopefully over time we'll see more of U.S. Africa policy reflecting both political and economic interests, hopefully in ways like the Chinese.
Right. I'm glad that you brought up the diaspora, because we've been here for a short period of time, but and the development framework is incredibly, it's difficult to work through, because you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Mm-hmm. But where do we fit into the development scheme? I mean, what should our influence be, if it should be? Mm-hmm. I mean, where do we fit into that framework?
I think there are a lot of folks that have taken it upon themselves to go back and invest and start businesses, and I think that's great and needed. But we also have to be sort of cautious of sort of bringing ideas of Western economies, and they might not necessarily work in the same way. So, for instance, so there's been, you go to Addis and there are all these cafes and restaurants and you can get your nails done and it's great. But then you look at like the price of bunna and teif and you're like, how in the world does the average person afford this? And so there has been, at the same time that there's been a look back at investment, there's also been an increasing gap between the rich and the poor there. And so I think that while it's great that the diaspora is going back and investing, and it's well intentioned, and I support it immensely. I hope that we continue to diversify where we invest. I mean, there are folks who go back and build schools and books, and that's great. And there are folks that go back and open salons and cafes, and that's great too. But there needs to be an eye outside of the capital at sort of countrywide economic growth in all sorts of public and private sectors. And so we need to be more organized, and part of that is recognizing our strength here in the U.S. and our numbers. I mean, Africans are the highest foreign-born educated, one of the highest foreign-born educated populations in the U.S. We have great influence and power if we organize ourselves better. The Jewish community has been great at doing that and lobbying for their interests, and so we should use that model for our communities and other African communities, and be able to sort of petition for what it is we want. But in the meantime, the diaspora should be and continue to be active in maintaining ties on the continent, and sharing information and resources. I mean, that's also what our organization, the Society of Ethiopians established in the diaspora, does, and serves as a space in which young Ethiopian Americans can be encouraged to be academic scholars in their field, but also contribute in terms of community service, and to bridge that gap between the diaspora and the motherland, if you will.
It's interesting because the narrative of America and development, and much of the Western world in development, has essentially been somewhat of an extension of colonialization, and in terms of culture, in terms of how they divert their monies. Do you see this narrative changing with the diaspora essentially kind of really throwing themselves into the development world and the various organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of people doing great stuff. It's probably not highlighted as much as it should be. Oftentimes, even through our organization, which has been in existence since '93, every year we honor several, Ethiopians from all different walks of life: science and technology, medicine, and healthcare, or music, and so you see how they've all given back. And so we just need to. I mean, I wouldn't sort of direct the diaspora to one certain area. I would say in general we should be focused on uplifting the Ethiopian community out of poverty. And so things like eradicating disease and poverty are always key, but you also do that through a number of different ways. And so I think it's important to sort of keep that in mind, but to also educate ourselves and keep our connection to the continent, because with every generation it becomes that much more difficult to maintain ties to the homeland. And and part of that means learning your language, learning your history and culture, which I'm doing and continue to do every day. And so we need to do that, to kind of pick up where our parents left off for us.
So when do you sleep? Because you wear so many different hats. I mean, do these interests are they propelling you into having the energy to really take on these different careers? Or I mean,
yeah, so the thing is, sometimes I'm told I sleep too much, and I'm like, then I'm told I do too much, and I think I'll just stick to being me, unapologetically. And so I've found that this country is great, and I really appreciate my parents really letting me go into any field that I want. I come from a family of engineers for the most part, and so I was the oddball that studied politics and economics and wanted to be a political scientist, but at the same time, there are all these other things I have always wanted to be. Comedian, and then my dad's like, oh, you have to be funny to be a comedian. I'm like, thanks, Dad, thanks for your support. Or I play piano on the side. I played basketball my whole life and in college, and so I think we should, if we have the opportunity to do it, why not? And I think that's what's driven me all the time, because I'm always like, well, and even in high school, everyone's like, why are you going to China? You didn't speak Chinese. I was like, that's exactly why I'm going. Wow. I'm like, this is my only opportunity. When will I ever get a chance to do it again? And so that's been my philosophy, because, take opportunity when it comes, and tomorrow is never promised. That's sort of been my motto for a while, and it's allowed me to learn from so many people and to be able to wear these different hats and really find out what it is I like to do, which is wear all these hats and do all these different things.
So where did this interest in politics burgeon? Because like you just said, you come from a family of engineers, you're from the Midwest. Mm-hmm. Were you watching C-SPAN growing up? What were the major influences that?
Let's see. So I did grow up listening to NPR all the time. That was and the news, because every Ethiopian household is like, you must be listening to the news and read. So that I'm sure that's all like played a role, even subconsciously, if not consciously. But I've sometimes people tell these stories like, the day I was born, I knew I wanted to be president. I was all over I was in ballet. I couldn't tell you, that I just knew for sure. Even now, I don't know exactly where I'll end up, but I know that I have a passion for my community, and to give voice to the issues that we care about. And as a political scientist, that I've certainly been impassioned to have a more inclusive American polity where we can get our voices heard like other communities do. And so when I see all the wonderful things that my sisters and brothers are doing, like yourself, in all these different fields, it's a huge inspiration, to me, and it helps so many people to see, I don't have to, just be a doctor or a lawyer, because, that's what it's like. You come to America, that's what I heard. So you can be an artist, you can be a poet, and you can be great at it. You can be a news journalist. And so we're so talented, and we're so lucky and fortunate to come from the history that we come from, and to really just get out there and to be in America where we can do all these great things.
Right. So amazingly, we haven't spoken about everything, all the hats that you wear. You're the historian for the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. I majored in political science when I was in undergrad, and of course, the narrative is just littered with old white men. Why is a society that, being a historian and a part of the society that you belong to, why is that important, and how and when are we going to start seeing an infiltration of Black political thought into classrooms, besides being a student in yours?
Yeah, I mean, right. So NCOPS has been really dear to me. All the profound, well-renowned Black political scientists have come through this organization, which was created in 1969. A lot of these folks, through their work, ended up creating what is now known as the subfield of Black politics, including my chair, Dr. Haynes Walton, and there's a whole host of other Black scientists who have mentored me and who I've learned from, whose work has been great in giving voice to some of the real inequality issues that Black people face and continue to face. And so it's been really instrumental for the discipline, because at the end of the day, the discipline shapes people's thinking, and and to what extent it and basically it's needed because history hasn't sort of given an opportunity to look at those issues, which are critical when it comes to Africans and African Americans. And so this organization has been a platform to see the kind of great work that other folks are doing, but to continue that work. The fundamental mission of NCOPS is to promote the political aspirations of people of African descent. So you've got all these academicians who are professors and teach history, but their work has more merit than just sort of writing and publishing articles and books. I mean, it's to have a real impact on the lives of these communities that need a voice for their interests to be heard. And so it's been a great place, because it's a place where the kind of work I do is not only respected but necessary and encouraged, because our country continues to get more and more diverse and complex, and you really need to have folks with the skill set who can actually show you the patterns and trends that are taking place within our history, to be able to talk about those issues, so people know exactly how far we've come and how far we have yet to go.
To bring a reflexive lens for Ethiopians in our history and our politics, what should we glean from the Black political experience here in America? Because I think a lot of times, we forget that there is a link there.
Mm-hmm.
We're not like some super special
Right.
race of people.
Right.
I mean, politics is politics regardless of race, class, or gender. How should we learn from the Black American experience and kind of implement that into our home?
I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be knowledgeable of the history of African Americans. It's central to the shaping of the U.S. Constitution, to ideas of citizenship and who should be included. This all came out of the Civil War amendments. I mean, the 14th Amendment, giving due process under the law. These came directly out of the abolishment of slavery, and the fact that African Americans have been sort of relentless in their push for equality has shaped how we define, rights and citizenship in this country. And a lot of people tend to forget that and sort of get caught up in this, why are African Americans, still complaining? It's a new day. Look at all these immigrants that have come and have done such a great job. No immigrant would be able to be successful if it weren't on the backs of African Americans, right, who have, through them in the civil rights movement, have given Black people and all minorities, white and Black, everybody, the opportunity to come and live a life and be treated like they should be treated. And right. So there's been a lot of misunderstanding, I think, on both sides. But again, if you go back to our history, there was a lot of, you mentioned link, and in political science, Michael Dawson, who's an African American political scientist, well known for his work on linked fate, which is sort of this idea that African Americans have actually sort of group interest is a proxy for self-interest, and so African Americans have made it sort of have made it an agenda for them to speak to the larger African American community and African community. And so we need to kind of look at our history more and recognize that they have been instrumental in allowing, you know, immigrants to come to this country and be productive citizens of society, and also recognize that there are still huge disproportionate gaps that are based on race, and African Americans unfortunately have suffered the worst in many cases, whether it's education, healthcare, but yet they also are the same community that has allowed for other people to get those same rights. So it's very important to understand their history, because their history is our history. It's Black history, it's American history, and so it's definitely important. And I'm very thankful, you know, and glad to be part of, you know, the African American community, because the work they have done has been sort of central to speaking to some of the issues that that folks deal with on the continent, whether it's, you know, race or ethnic based.
Well, to in terms of bringing spotlight to Ethiopians who are really galvanizing and making a difference in people's lives, you served as the National Youth Coordinator for the Society of Ethiopians, established in the diaspora, SEED, since 2000, another profession you have. What is SEED all about?
SEED has been a really wonderful outlet for Ethiopians and Ethiopian Americans. Since '93, we've had these huge award banquet ceremonies where we honor college students and high school students, mostly senior high school students, who are doing amazingly well in school and community service. They're giving money back to orphanages in Ethiopia. They're you know, wonderful at, you know, basketball and sports or art, but also in school, and they always have this community service element. And then we also honor adults, whether they're Ethiopian or not, who have given back to the Ethiopian community. And so it serves as a platform to encourage young Ethiopian Americans to be productive citizens of society. And it's been great because, you know, again, you need to know your history, and you need to in order to preserve it, you have to, you know, you have to hear about the accomplishments that our people are engaged in. And it's also an opportunity to thank the role models that have come through the years. We've honored Alahun Gassasa, we've honored Dr. Jambir Tafarra. There's all sorts of people. I mean, I can't name them all, but and then last year we honored the two scientists, Johannes Selassie and Dr. Gede, who found Ardi, which is the fossil older than Lucy. And so it's great because you see, you know, people you can identify with in all these fields doing wonderful things. And so it's really been a wonderful experience. So yeah, I've been doing it every year. We'll continue to do it.
Has there been an honoree or even just a role model for you that's been really influential in your life and helps you kind of gauge how you should continue to progress and through these various hats that you take on?
That's a hard one. I mean, obviously my parents have been big role models for me, but I tend to be inspired by all sorts of people. And when it comes to, you know, my dissertation, I actually remember being a sophomore in college and hearing Michael Eric Dyson, who I really didn't know before he came to Oberlin, and he just blew me away. You know, if you've ever heard him speak for the first time, it's transformational. I was like, I want to be a political scientist, even though he's not a political scientist, but he's a political commentator. And I knew, you know, I wanted to pursue academia. But, you know, if you talk to me about music or the Ethiopian community, I mean, all the members on the board of SEED have been wonderful and inspirational, you know, role models for me, and then other folks we know as well. So I mean, it just depends. You know, I'm inspired by you.
Oh gosh, no. I mean, I'm really interested in knowing. And this may be a difficult question, but what's your benchmark? What's the kind of goal or standard that you've set for yourself where you feel like, you know what, if that happens, then I know that my life's legacy or my life's purpose, the opportunities that I've been able to be offered here have been met?
So that I think I want a benchmark that I can see but never reach, because then it'll keep me going.
Right.
I don't ever want to stop doing the work that I do to give voice to our people, whether it's in academia or beyond. I know I can always improve upon what I'm doing, and so so for me, I mean, I the more I see our people excelling in whatever field they're doing, the more I see folks not suffering. That makes me keep going. So I just want my legacy, and I have a long way to go yet before sort of reaching, you know, fulfilling some of the goals that I have. But my ultimate benchmark, I don't ever want to reach, but want to always work as hard as I can to reach it. So it will keep me, you know, keep me going. Yeah, I think that's it.
Well, I think you're an incredible person. I really wish you could be a professor. For me, maybe for when I go for my doctorate, would never know.
There you go.
But thank you so much for coming on this show.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for watching this interview with Dr.Menna Demessie. If you want to find out more about the SEED program, visit ethioseed.org, and also don't forget to stop by ebstv.tv. Also check out The Benchmark at facebook.com/thebenchmark. I'm Kallie Ejigu. Stay tuned for the next episode.